Welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. No rags, no different color flags. Yeah, welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. No guns, no knives, and the weapons formed against me in the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. Are ever gonna prosper? I'ma serve the Father. Welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the
There we go. Welcome to the war zone. Somehow Jamie hit the mute button through his Insta booking. So again, let's try this intro again. Welcome to the war zone, episode 4. I know the last 3 weeks we've been talking about Russia, Ukraine, and God, where God falls in with all that. Hey, Freddie, what's up, man? Oh, Freddie Edders is on.
Yeah. Hey, Freddie.
And Mr. Dylan Sherman. I did say hey to you, bud, but apparently it was muted. So I appreciate the heads up with no sound. Also, this week we're going to switch gears. We're not really going to so much focus on Russia, Ukraine anymore. So
is that over?
I mean, for us, so I mean, it's not out there, I don't think. But this week, as you can see back here, we're going to be talking about the ecclesia called out to be the church, and we're going to talk about everything, what it means to be the church. And by the way, very big side note, hashtag Clay's back.
Clay is back.
He is back. He's staring at me like, what is this weirdo doing? So, but so, you know, I guess we're going to talk about all of the areas of what it means to be the church, not from a religious point of view, but from a very authentic, real, transparent point of view. And we're going to be talking about tithing tonight and all that good stuff. Like, you know, guys, this is the war zone. So we're going to talk about all the quote unquote off limits topics. So, and, you know, I'm really excited about this week because we're really starting to get into the whole no land, you know? So,
White elephant in the room.
White elephant in the room. Yeah. So, you know, guys, I encourage you, share this out. I need everybody to share it out once or twice.
Yeah. And subscribe.
And subscribe if you're on the YouTube page, follow if you're on the Facebook page, all of that good stuff. So I think we'll, I guess, create an animated thing where it can jump up and go bing and point and all that good stuff. So Alicia and Bobby Woodard's here. Hello. I take it you know them?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I said, please know them, because if they're on my page and I didn't know it, then I'm just like, please know.
They're actually on your page.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah. It's your cousin.
It's your I wouldn't doubt it, actually.
Yeah.
Actually, I have one person on my page, so and the censorship begins. Thank God for the remnant page. So
Yeah. So we were
Ecclesia.
yeah, we were talking about again, Josh was saying we talked about Russia, Ukraine for the last couple weeks and how it fits into Bible prophecy. And I think we covered all the ends that we can cover. Even got a little political last week.
It did. It felt good.
And it was good. And but I felt like, we were talking today, and what spurred this on today was Josh called me today, and we began to just chat online or on the phone, and just stuff started coming up. Just not tithing, but what is the church? Who is the church? And where is the church?
Yeah.
Because it's that kind of that white elephant in the room when you ask somebody, well, where have you been? Where are you? Or why haven't you been coming? Or why are you sitting at home? Or why are you looking for another church? Or what's wrong with your current church? And I was playing golf today with a pastor friend of mine, and
Must be nice.
which the pastor friend have a pastor friend?
Golf.
Oh, golf. And now
We got a pastor friend. He's right here.
I do. And my golf game is pretty horrible. So if you're out there and you know anything about golf, you can help me out. Here I am. But we were talking. He's from one of the largest churches in our county, and we were talking about the church a little bit, and I said, "Have you heard of the statistic about the church as far as like 60% of the church during the pandemic has walked away?" And the sad thing is, not only have they walked away from the ecclesia, they say they're not coming back.
Mm.
And I looked at my friend today and I said, "Do you see any of that happening in your church?" He goes, "Well, absolutely." And then I said these things. I said, "It's been 2 years now. Do we continue to reach out to those who statistically say they're not coming back? Or do we focus on those who are here and those who are coming?" And then his response to that was, "That's the $1 million question." Because your heart says you reach everybody you can, but you only have so much time and so much energy to put in everything that we do. And then he brought another interesting statistic up. He says he was part of I don't remember the guy's name, but he has an organization that deals with statistics and deals with churches and what they go through. And he said this, that in 2022, this is beyond what the current statistic used to be. And I don't know what that is, but whatever it was, this is an add-on to it, that over 10,000 churches will close their doors this year in the U.S. That's above, if it was an average of 3 or 4 or 5,000 a year closing, there is an additional 10,000 churches in the remaining part. This is just like a week ago, this thing happened. So in the next, we're in almost in April, right? So the next, anywhere from 6 to 8 months, we're going to see 10,000 church doors close.
Man.
And
it's a steep number, dude.
It is. And then we can ask, why are they closing? And that can lead us into a lot of topics tonight. Why do you think, so you guys chime in, why, if we look at that number, if we're talking about ecclesia, which is, define it for us.
Assembling.
Yeah.
Or called out to be the church.
Yeah. Let's make sure you can read.
It's on the screen.
But I'm going to turn it over to you two just for a minute, let you guys chat back and forth about, so why are they leaving?
Yeah.
Why are church doors closing? Go ahead. Somebody.
Well, the things that come to mind are like church hurt, guilt, shame. Biggest one that I can think of, and I believe what I hear from a lot of people, unfortunately, is offense. They sometimes, it's easy to get offended. Apparently, these days it seems to be even easier to get offended. And just self-reflection. I'm aware that I get offended at the offense. I'm serious.
I love it.
Like, but it is like that's people are walking in offense. I mean, big time. And so, I mean, I'm just being real. Like, just getting to know you as well as I have. People will kind of share their offenses with me from time to time. Not about you, but about anything going on in the church.
Sure, talking like
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, if we're so easily offended by every little thing, I mean, I just feel like that's a big part of the problem.
So you got, you got churches closing 10,000 plus this year because there's a lot of offense. So if there's a lot of offense, people just aren't coming.
Yeah.
So there's that part of that 60% that have walked away. And I'll chime in, then I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Yeah.
That, I mean, I brutally ask. Sometimes I'll ask somebody like, why don't you come to church anymore? And they're like, well, to be brutally honest with you, Pastor Jamie, I don't think I need church anymore.
Yeah.
I've learned for 2 years I can live without it. So I'm stable. They'll say this. So I'm stable enough to sit at home, possibly watch the online media part of the church, or maybe don't, or maybe, and that'll last maybe. And this is the thing about that, because this is the thing I heard another statistic, and we can talk about a lot of statistics tonight, because these are what these groups do. They find these numbers that at the beginning of the statistics, the online community went out the roof.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
But now it's dropped.
Right now.
It's just dropped out the bottom.
Wow. I didn't know
And
that.
you got less people in attendance even online than you had before the pandemic.
Huh.
So with that being said, so I don't need the church, or the church has hurt me. And I realized it was just an easy way out.
Yeah.
The pandemic was an easy way
That
out
makes
because
sense.
I had a fence before the pandemic.
Right. Right.
So I have an easy way out.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think that that's just one of many reasons why the church doors are closing. What else do you think?
Well, man, I think it goes back to what you really said, and which is where, my whole thought process was before, before anywhere close to the pandemic, it was like there was a lot of new talk in the church going like, well, I don't need to go to church to be a Christian. Like, I don't need to be there to be a Christian because I can still die and actually go straight, to heaven without actually being in the church and this, that, and the other. And sure, to actually enter the kingdom, you just got to be saved. But he also says, do not forsake, the gathering of the saints too. But my actual point is now, like you said, once, that hit, everything went online. And I actually helped a lot of churches get online that wasn't online. So, it's just, like that entire market exploded, and now it's just an easy cop out. Now it's just easy to say, like, oh, I can just catch it at home, or I do my Sundays on, with Pastor Jamie, or I do my Sundays, with Robin Bullock, or I do, some of the, because there's so many online platforms and avenues now that you can go and watch. You can get worship around the clock. You can get, the word around the clock.
Right.
And, all these people go to a virtual church status. And two, and I think we're going to get into this in just a few minutes about how the number of people that tithe in America that's part of the church has dropped so drastically. They can't afford to keep the doors open.
I want to read this. This is a quote by a pastor out of Florida.
Sure.
Craig, I'm going to butcher this name.
Groeschel, probably.
Groeschel, I think.
Way to go, Clay.
Yeah.
That's why Clay's here.
But he shared this because they were the title of the thing was why attending church is so important. And he says this, he goes, there's something better. He says to worship God together and be committed to worship him together, to hear his word together. He said there's something to this. And then he says, do not reduce church to listening to a podcast, which you're doing tonight. It's so much more than that. And he goes on to say this
on
quote,
Tuesday night.
This is quote, it's community.
Yeah.
It's worshiping with others, praying for others. Listen to this, hurting,
Yep.
bringing your offense together with others, hurting and whatever with others, serving others, being involved in the lives of others.
Yeah.
This is a guy who has a mega church down in Florida. And I ever saw he's part of the ARC organization, which we are a part of. So I follow him on occasions because he's part of the same organization that Remnant Church birthed through. And so, he's a pretty down to earth guy. And this is some of his quotes. He's like, it seems like he's like, not only do we worship, we have word together, we worship together, we have community together. But I love this part he has, but we hurt together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we realize if there is offense that you brought up, then we can work through that offense together, because if we do not work through the offense together, then we carry that baggage for the rest of our life. And we'll carry that offense if you ever re-engage in your current church or another church that you replant yourself into, and you haven't dealt with that offense with that person.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, then that it just carries over to the next gathering, so to speak.
Right.
So I love how he explained that. That's why it stood out to me today when I was reading that we can hurt together, and we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
That we can, and part of
That's
that's getting real together. That if you have an issue with me, I think anything can be resolved.
Yeah. Sure.
Anything, because I think about our church, because we're all a part of it. I think we have some of the most dynamic worship around.
Right.
If
Absolutely.
not the most dynamic worship. When I say dynamic, it's not about the hitting every perfect note.
Right.
It is in being perfectly in sync every time, or playing the best, most modern songs. That's not what I'm saying. But it is Holy Spirit filled and Holy Spirit led, and there's room for the Holy Spirit to move in our worship and what we do.
Right.
And it's genuine. And not that other worship in other churches is not genuine, but it's more than I'm giving the Lord 22 minutes. And I'm not I'm not judging anybody who works off of a clock, because many churches work off of a clock. Yeah. But I'm like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just not me. Mm-hmm. So, and we don't work off of a clock. We work off, if we do, it's heaven's clock.
Yeah.
So
talk to the holy clock.
Right. So with that, and
Forgot about that.
Yeah. TikTok to the holy clock.
Yeah.
But so think about our church, and I think about even the things that I share. So you have worship, and then you have word, and then you have an altar response, and altogether we're like last probably at our church on an average of 2.5 hours, two and a half hours, total.
3 sometimes
3. And again, but the cool thing about it is you can come to Remnant Church, be who you are. We're not asking you to change anything about yourself. Be who you are. Come in and leave when you want.
Right.
It's a full free expression of who you are. And if Jesus wants to work on you and do anything differently, that's between you and the Lord. Right. You don't have to stand. You don't have to clap. You don't have to anything. You can come, sit, stay an hour if you want, and leave and feel like you've got your experience. And we say nothing about that.
Yep.
So, but the cool thing about us is the Holy Spirit environment that is there, that says that Holy Spirit, you can do what you want. Right. Again, we're more than spirit filled, we're spirit led. So there's a lot that's good that happens in our church. I feel it makes us different. And we have different ministries like Transformation that really nobody does. And even we had visitors this Sunday that from out of town, they're like, we've never seen some of the things you're talking about.
Right.
What you're preaching on, we've never heard. And it's not like I'm preaching out of a different Bible. It's the same Bible. Yeah. But we're talking about some hard things recently and some of the stuff that's coming out. So when I'm saying with that, if I'm just reflecting on our church, if Remnant Church is the right church and it fits your DNA, we say it like this: if it's your tribe,
yeah,
right,
then if you hold offense, let's work through it so you can get back into the tribe.
Right.
So you can, I say, get back, you can re-engage.
Yeah.
Right.
because we can work through anything. That's what makes us men and women of God.
Right. Yeah. Like you're hitting on something here, and I'll actually speak to it and just,
Yeah. So I was just, just making a reference there to the absence of the church with the people of the church, because sometimes if we're not careful, we're doing more harm to others than we can ever do to ourselves by simply not showing up, because it brings doubt in other people.
That's good. Yeah.
It brings borderline offense in other people because they're offended because they think you're offended, and now they're offended because they think you're offended.
Yeah, that's true. It happens.
and ain't nobody said nothing yet.
Right. Nobody said anything. Or they think, well, what, maybe I'm the cause of them not coming. So now I'm going to carry something I should never be carrying just simply because somebody won't come back to church.
Right.
So it's the way the enemy is really swirling this thing and causing a lot of division inside and outside. And people are hurting. Listen, people are hurting in the church, but there are people hurting outside the church. And this 60% of people are hurting. And I think if not careful, you try to, I know in the past for me, if I've hurt and don't want to deal with it, I just cover it up with something else. I spend my time doing other things so I don't be concerned about why I'm hurting,
Right.
about my relationship with people inside the church. It's
Right.
it's a coping mechanism that we use.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway.
So, which I really believe, man, that, all right. So I'll just give you a good example. So, because it says in the Bible to confess your sins one to another, right?
And you'll be healed.
Right. So let's just be real. Let's say that you go stand in front of the average church right now, or like you go confess to the average church body that maybe you went and snorted a line of coke, or maybe you went and looked at a bunch of pornography, or maybe you did these things. And again, the average religious church, I'm definitely not talking about this church because it's way above average, but what do you think the response would be?
You're asking me?
Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, just the average response. I mean, I know
Of the body of Christ.
right.
Well, I mean, we talk about, let's even define or look at the word transformation. And we talked about that on Sunday. It's a great message, by the way. Transformation. Listen, transformation.
Yeah, I'd call it at home.
Is the difficult part before we get to the harvest.
Right.
We talked about that because Jesus was talking about in Luke. He says you cast your seeds and it becomes night and day, and you don't even see there's any growth. He says, and yet there's something happening when you don't even know something's happening. He's talking about the harvest getting ready to come in. And so I was breaking down this whole, it starts in you. There's a casting, there's a planting, there's the ground, pushing up, putting a demand on the seed, which is us. But the cool thing about the whole demand is there's where the difficult thing comes, because we know what's in us. We can cast ourselves out there. We can plant somewhere, but all of a sudden there's that transition. It's when I made an example about that kernel of corn. You put it in the dirt, and all of a sudden that ground puts a demand on it to start to produce. It takes so much energy for that kernel to crack and for the root system to start coming out and that thing start to push upward to the surface, that transformation. Because until that happens, you'll never get topside. You'll never be fruitful, and you got to be fruitful, ready for the harvest to come. The harvest is the last thing that happens. He says, you got to see the sickle. You got to see the head of what's grown before you can even sickle it to bring the harvest in. And I'm like, sometimes we just want the harvest without the transformation, with that transitioning, that God doing that work in us, and that transitioning out of things like offense and stuff like that, or hurt or whatever. But until we do that, are we even ready to receive the harvest?
Yeah. So, back to the whole hurt, that's something that's not taught. That's something that's not common. what church, just off the top of your head, can like you actually think of that hurts as a church, that actually, confesses shortcomings and, just being honest and transparent with people? Because, and I believe, and I can speak for me, like, the reason why I operated in the sense of being or trying to be like discreet, covert, and always trying to put on this front like everything was okay, because of the judgment that I was used to receiving based on what I did wrong, or based on what I didn't say right, or based what I said wrong. Like the actual connection with the church for me was based off of those things. And for so long, then I just began to develop this mask that
Right.
wasn't me.
Well, we church is messy. Let's just say that church is messy.
It is.
Back to that transformation, that cocaine that you made reference to,
Booger sugar.
the attic. I'm sitting in Athens, Georgia, back in 2005 or 6, I think it was. So I was living there, and they had used this word transformation. I think it was transformation that was happening up in the northwest of that cities were being transformed, and they'd seen this one city. I can't remember which city the name of the city was, but it was anyway. God moved in the city so huge. Crime went down 80%.
Wow.
Just like that. Suicides went to nearly nothing. I mean, just statistics were like mind-boggling when God was moving. And so these people were going around teaching transformation. Like, do you want this to happen to your city? So we're meeting at this church, and I was just a participant as far as an onlooker. Wasn't supposed to speak or nothing. I was actually new to the city, new to this church. This is our Sunday church we were attending, because we were doing campus ministry at the same time. But when we were doing campus ministry on Thursday nights, we were feeding the homeless on Tuesdays, and then we were just attending the church on Sunday. And so I was just listening to these people, and they were talking about God moving this way and that way, and through worship and this. And what I did not hear, getting these communities to gather, campus ministry, this next generation. But what they didn't have, but anyway, they let me know 30 minutes before this. The pastor said, "Oh, by the way, the guy we had speaking on the next generation of kids coming through got sick, and we need you to fill in and just talk about a movement of God in that generation." And I'm towards the end of the whole presentation, and I never hear anything about hurting people. I never hear anything about, I hear about, let's change this in our church, and let's change this in our church, and let's do this in our community, and let's do this on the campus. Let's do this. It sound like a bunch of small group meetings all over the place, and it was just fine. But I never heard, and when I got up, I never got asked back after I said what I said, but I said, you want revival, you want transformation. I said, but what I'm hearing is we're not prepared. I said, what happens when drug addicts, people with needles in their arms, start coming into the church?
Yeah.
What happens when prostitutes start walking in the door? What happens when battered women who are running from their lives, from men who want to kill them because they're trying to get out of an abusive situation, come through the door? And what happens when a woman who's just had an abortion and she don't know what to do, and I just went through all these scenarios, and there was no response. They said, "Thank you for your input. You can have a seat now."
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, I'm like, and again, we have dealt, even in our local body, Remnant Church, we've dealt with people that have been difficult to deal with because they haven't been in church and they don't know the protocol of the church, so to speak.
Right.
Not that that matters, but at some point you got to see some transformation, and it's just not a take. There has to be a teaching of a giving and a taking.
Yeah.
That we establish you so you can be a part of the ecclesia, a functioning part of the ecclesia. So there, it is messy, you know. And I mean, I remember when our youth ministry, when I was a youth pastor, grew from like 30 kids to 250. And we had kids everywhere. But the thing about it, we had kids that were coming off the streets where their parents were beating them or their parents were on drugs. And we had kids in the bathroom smoking marijuana in the church bathrooms, you know. And the modern day bodies came to me. The leadership of the church says, we don't want this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what do you want? And they're like, well, we want you to take care of our kids.
Oh my gosh.
And then my
Wow.
time from there was short lived.
Mm-hmm.
Sure
And that's
it
when I
was.
shifted and moved to Athens. And I'm like, so I'm talking to people. I'm like, so if the ecclesia is the ecclesia is messy. It is a call. It's a call out for people to come to the church, no matter how messy that looks. You know, the thing about it is we want to catch the fish, but when you catch the fish,
We don't want to clean them.
you don't want to clean them.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not saying every church is like that, but I'm trying to answer your question.
Sure.
That some churches are ready for that. I'm not saying we're fully ready for all that, because all of a sudden there's a demand on your time, your energy,
Yeah.
your resources.
Right.
You know, I mean, we're sitting here actually tonight on our church property land that we will build on, hopefully
Amen.
sooner than later. And part of the dream is to have places for battered women to stay and for homeless people to stay.
Right.
But that takes funding.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. I was talking to
Quite a bit of it.
again, my friend today, and we were talking about capital campaigning, and you're like, you have to see if people want to share in the vision God has given the leader of the church, would happen to be me, for Remnant. But what I say about Remnant that I think that makes us differently is that you're not here because of my vision. You're here because your vision comes into alignment with the vision of the house.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, you just come in looking for somebody that's got a good vision, but what you've carried in your heart was already in my heart,
Yeah.
and it gelled together. And say, I can see myself doing that.
Right. Right.
And I think that's what makes us different. It's because we're not a cookie cutter church, and we're not just another church on the corner, but we are a church with a vision that wants to help our community and see God move, see revival come, see not just not feeding the homeless and just not getting the prostitute off the street or this and that, but it's also sowing into our children in the schools, and maybe one day having a school, and you know, all these things that, I mean, the vision is so big, it's scary what the ecclesia really is supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's more than a Sunday morning, really more than a Sunday morning gathering that we like, yeah, you know, and go home and feel good about ourselves.
Well, man, it's like, you know, I was actually discussing with somebody today. It's like, you know, the orphans and, you know, the widows and the schooling and, you know, like, you know, the welfare and all of these things were in the hands of the church. And then whenever the church actually defaulted on those things,
Absolutely.
then we rendered them unto Caesar, or AKA, you
Into
know, the government.
Yeah.
And now, you know, and then us as the church, we actually sit back shocked, wondering why God was pulled out of the school system. And then, you know, we sit back shocked whenever, you know, all these horrible things are happening and there's nothing really being done about it, is because whenever you default on your actual position as the church, I mean, there's no like ground in the middle to where, you know, it can just land and it all be okay. It's either if you default on like your calling as, you know, the church, and then all of a sudden now it's in the hands of Caesar, because I think in The Chosen, there was actually quite a few times whenever Rome would come to the high priest and be like, you can deal with your issue or we will. And, you know, I was like, man, that's actually happened.
Yeah.
Is we were supposed to deal with these issues as, you know, the church, and helping these things and really overseeing these things.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we defaulted on that. And now
Well,
Rome, quote unquote, is,
well, yeah. I mean, part of the ecclesia is governmental, meaning we were we were called to govern over the planet, and that even governments would come to us for advice and for instructions on how to operate. But we definitely defaulted on that, and now the church is where it is.
Yeah.
I think it looks a lot differently than what it did in the beginning. So, but yeah, so it's sad I mean, I think we're in the most amazing day we've ever in the history of the earth, as far as what's going to happen, as far as even talking back to last week, or remembering back to last week when we talked about end times a little bit and how things were shaping in that direction. If that is true, that means there will be a great harvest that comes in, a great move of God in the earth. But but we can't just sit back and let's wait on that to come. We got to currently engage in our current culture and see how can we, in the authority that God's given us, operate where we are, and just not sit back and wait for the Lord to come back.
So let's transition just a little bit, because we're down to 23 minutes, and the 15-minute mark, 10-minute mark, I want to take just questions from folks that are in the room and all that too about what we've said tonight. But let's actually transition to Clay. I really want your input on this because you're really knowledgeable on this. Is a heart position of worshiping or worship to tithe and to give into the church. And I actually know what the Lord has shown me about it, and I'll actually say it after you're done. But man,
Oh, you mean the tithe being part of your worship?
yeah. Just really getting to that place. Just expound on that real quick.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you're bringing it up because, well, first of all, before Jamie, you read what you read that Craig wrote. I was thinking, I don't ever want to miss corporate worship. Like, there's something that happens corporately that, I mean, it can only be God. It can only be the Lord moving. I mean, he confirms himself over and over and over. But I think the trick of the enemy is he tries to snatch that away really quickly from us so we forget. But it's so powerful. My heart aches for people that don't know that type of worship that is so powerful corporately. Anyway, so I mean, our tithe is part of our worship. I actually haven't thought about it exactly like that until you just said it, but it's all his. I was listening to some comments that a very well-known pastor made online this past week. And he was basically saying, is the tithe biblical? Why are all these preachers preaching about tithe? In fact, when I was a preacher, I stopped doing that. And we don't do that anymore. We just give where we're led to give. And thank the Lord. I mean, a bunch of people that responded had very positive things to say, like, yes, we do tithe, and here's why. And we can see the fruit in our lives financially from the tithing and from all other areas. But, I used to be this way. Like, I used to make a lot of money and I would give a good bit, but I did it sporadically to, just whoever needed some money this week or whoever kind of was in my path. If they crossed my path and I felt like it was the Lord, I would give. But so as I was encouraged by reading those comments on tithing, for some people defending the tithe and pointing out, look, if you look in the Old Testament, they were not just giving 10%, they were giving somewhere in the neighborhood, I think from what I have studied, like 23%.
It's up there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, how can you not? It was almost like I got a little bit ticked off of what the guy was saying, because it felt like he was actually encouraging people not to give a tithe to their local church. And I was like, dude, you can't do this. Like, his whole point for doing it was because he was so against the prosperity gospel, which I understand. Right.
There's two different things.
He was coming, right. He was coming at like this all encompassing view.
Yeah.
Because of what we know is probably false doctrine, this, prosperity, and that, everything's going to be great when you come to Jesus. You're never going to have any troubles and you'll just be rich. Right. So anyway, but yes, our tithe is part of our worship. this has always stuck with me. I remember my dad telling me he had like an epiphany or like a moment of revelation one year when they were trying to figure out their tithe or something to that effect. It was when they were younger. And he said, well, I don't know how much we're going to make. And my mom was like,
This is good.
why don't you decide what we're going to give, and then you'll know what we're going to make.
That's good.
Bro,
And he was
until
like,
I put it back off with
That is so good.
I think
That's
he
so
said that
good.
kind of really changed things for him. But I mean, the Lord really does care about our finances. I don't think he wants us to be poor and destitute and out on the street.
No.
But if we're not giving, and I mean, I personally think a tithe that like tithe literally means 10%. I don't know that it's exactly biblical and lines up with exactly what script. I don't think this about that, but personally, I think at least 10% is what we should be giving to our local church. I mean, I know my sister actually spoke on this in their church in South Carolina at one point, because I want to say she got involved with some part of the church and was made aware of like the percentage of people tithing.
What do you think that is?
It's very low. I think you've told me it's in the 20% area.
Well,
well.
let's pause there. This is the new statistic. This is the new tithing statistic, and I happened to look it up today. As of
This year.
2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
5% of churchgoers tithe today.
Wow.
5%.
5%.
So let's put a number on that. So out of 200 million people in the church, like 1 million of them tithe. I think that's,
And here's the thing, like, I'm not saying I don't have financial issues. I have all kinds of stuff to still clean up. But where I've seen the Lord move the most is the one thing he says, test me on this thing. How can you not get it? I don't understand.
So for a long time, you were in the investment world, right?
Yeah.
And people would probably invest religiously, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like it was a part of their daily act and it was a
Right,
part of
right.
their weekly, monthly. But when you start talking about investing in the kingdom and you start, I mean, now all of a sudden you're religious and now all of a sudden, like, like you can't mandate us to do that, but
pastor wants all your money.
right.
You know.
But yet you can mandate yourself to invest in stocks and bonds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yet at the same time, you preach God out of one mouth and like you preach, I mean, it's just like you said, I'm really glad you brought that up. The one thing he says, test me on in the entire Bible.
Yeah.
In the other ones, Christ tells, the devil, don't tempt the Lord thy God, but God will tell you to test him on it.
Yeah.
This one thing.
Yeah.
So if God doesn't do anything coincidentally, he don't react out of raw emotion. I mean, like if he says it, there's a reason.
Right.
And then he says to test me on this one thing.
But then we have people wondering why things are not going well financially. I was one of them. So I'm talking to me too. But
Absolutely.
But you know why? Because one of those comments that the people stated last week that got my attention, I mean, it was they were actually supporting tithing with their comment, but they said, I give the Lord what is his. And see, that's what changed with me is I used to give that way too and think, well, that 10% is yours, or this percentage is yours. It's all his. That's where it comes from, a place of worship where we recognize and honor the Lord that this is all yours and all you're requiring me to do is give a tenth of it. I mean, come on. It's like a sideways or a backwards thinking that the enemy has so many of us twisted up in.
And the funny thing, when you think about that, every time you buy something, you pay 7%.
Yeah,
And,
right.
and think nothing else. And think,
Right.
Well,
and when you fill up your car, which is very high today, the tax on that's like
I didn't notice.
20 something percent. It's up there.
Right. No.
It's really high.
Well,
If you
except
don't-
in Georgia now, they did away with the gas tax.
Did they?
Yeah.
Praise God.
Yeah, it passed.
Hallelujah.
But yes, true. Up until about 2 weeks ago, yes.
Yeah. I'm like, so there's things you don't grumble about because you have to do it. But yet, I mean, there should be no option to give into the kingdom as a believer, because it shouldn't be an option to opt out. It's like you can't opt out of paying sales tax. You're going to go, you buy a shirt, you're going to pay 7%.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But if you believe that word, And I love how we were talking about it today, and I try to not be neutral about it, but I'm like, just try to, I don't want people, because I rarely preach on tithe, but I've been talking about the seed a lot lately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I talked about it Sunday about if you look at because a seed can be so many things. It can be, but it's also your tithe. It's your money.
Right.
I said, if you put it on a shelf, there's no return until you sow it somewhere.
Right.
And there's a demand put on it. If you sow it into the kingdom, you're actually putting a demand on the kingdom to give you a return.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I can promise you the kingdom will respond because,
Oh yeah.
you know what I'm saying? There'll be a return. And it is a lifetime investment.
Yep.
It's not, and I think that's where some people it's not like, well, I'll give when I feel like I want to or can. And I was telling Josh today, and then people might give 1 month, they give 5 months later because they feel guilty they hadn't given 5 months. It's not.
That was me for a while.
It's not about and thinking, well, I got to catch up. No, that's not. But what you did in that 5 month span, you open up a door for the devourer to come in. Yeah. And say it how you said it today.
Well, I think I told Clay this right after the Lord really showed it to me. He said, and I was riding down, it was Interstate 95, and I heard it. And he said to me, he says, son, whenever you give, you open up heaven upon your finances.
Yeah.
He says, but when you don't give, you open up the door to the demonic devourer to your finances. And you give him permission to that. And I was like, whoa. Because I mean, dude, I've heard the word curse. You curse your finances. And it's we hear those words so much because they're quote unquote charismatic words, and we become immune to that verbiage. But whenever he put it in a different way for me, he says, you open up heavenly increase on, on that area of your life when you tithe. But when you rob me, when you steal from me, then you open up the door to the devourer. And I was like, whoa. And then sitting right here, this is what I didn't say to you, was absolutely 100% of it is God's. But God allots us to be the steward of the 100% with the expectation that we'll give back 10th.
Yeah.
And so then he can increase the other 90.
Yeah. I always tell people, because I've had people come to me from time to time, and they're like, well, how much should I give? And I never give them a percentage.
Right.
I'm like, because the widow with the mites, she gave it all, right?
Yep. She did.
So she gave 100%. So I said, well, let's look at it like this. What do you want God to bless? What do you want his hand on? So it's like an investor.
Yeah.
If I've got $100, I choose how much of that $100 to give you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you invest, right?
Yeah.
For the return. If I give you $10, which is 10%, and you invest that, next month I give you $100, you make the same investment, a different investment in the same company, which one will grow faster, 10 or 100?
Yeah, the 100.
Absolutely. In the same company with the same,
I think.
yeah. You know what I'm saying? So why did I make up that analogy? It's because it's not to me even about the number. It's about what I'm asking God to breathe on.
Yeah.
And,
right.
and for God to bless. And I love keep the devourer off of my stuff.
For sure.
Yeah.
So we got a comment right here by Greg Kennedy.
Okay.
It says, I believe in tithing, and I tithe to several places. It's what the pastor does with the tithe money. When I speak out against prosperity pastors, it's directed to those pastors who keep it all to themselves. And Greg also, because it's so long, that's going to cut a little bit of it off. But it says, when I speak out against prosperity pastors, it's directed to those pastors who keep all of it to themselves and are flashy with it. Joel Osteen is one of the biggest ones. If he gave it all back and helped the poor as Jesus commands, I wouldn't have an issue. But the heretic locked the doors to the church during the hurricane and wouldn't offer them a place to stay. So where would you go with that?
I'll respond to that one.
Okay.
You want to respond to?
I definitely do, but go ahead.
Okay. My response as a pastor to Greg is that here's the key. It's in the transfer.
Absolutely.
I'm speaking to Greg.
That's good.
Greg, you can't determine what you give based on what you feel like they're going to do.
Right. Right.
You have to give out of obedience, and once it
Lord.
leaves your hand, it's off of you. All of a sudden, it becomes a response. The what's coming out of your hand is now in the hands of someone else that will be responsible for that, and they will have to stand before the Lord if they misuse that fund.
It changes, the stewardship.
Yeah. So some people are like, well, I'm just not going to give. I'm going to come to my church. I just don't like it because the pastor talks about money. He preaches on tithe. So I'm going to come to church and worship, but I'm going to give my tithe somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's completely wrong.
Oh yeah.
It's just my thought. But I think you need to sow into where you get to the place that's sowing back into you. So, but Greg, I'll just say it like this: once it leaves your hands, wipe your conscience of it.
Right.
You can. I'm not saying you can't pick and choose where you give, but don't be concerned about what Joel's going to do and what Bob's going to do and what Charlie's going to do with it.
Jamie.
I mean, if it's Jamie, Remnant Church, if it's obvious, then just don't give to those.
Right. Right.
But don't cast judgment, because we don't fully know the heart of Joel Osteen. And this is, if we're not careful, then we start carrying a critical spirit towards somebody, and all of a sudden judgment heaps back on us. So, and I've learned, if I don't like someone who I'm listening to, like, instead of being critical, I just cut it off.
Right. That's actually what my response is going to be.
Just
don't go there. Right.
Yeah.
Wherever you're being fed.
Yeah. So to me, it's in the transfer. So once I, if I, let me see if I got any money. If I do. Let me see.
He spent it all.
So let me see if there's anything here. Oh yeah. So hold on.
Sorry.
You're taking it. So once I take, this is $20. Once I do this and I right here, done.
Right.
I'm no longer responsible for it. The devourer's off of me because I'm given, and now you're responsible for it. So,
but it's really like, I mean, you just blew my mind a minute ago when you said 5% of people are believers.
It is the now.
So
statistic.
what would happen if 100% of believers just simply tithe?
Well, there's actually a number for that.
There's a number.
Wow.
Yeah.
The kingdom would prosper per year $139 billion.
Wow.
In the U.S.
Now, is that just counting the giving that would take place? That's not counting the increase.
No.
That the Lord would do.
No.
Wow.
That's just the giving.
So we'd probably be running things. I mean, the kingdom.
Well, yeah, because I mean, all that stuff that we actually,
yeah.
So all that stuff that we actually defaulted on, dude, I even believe we actually defaulted the economy back over to Caesar. Because because if you look at the economy of, the Jews and how they run things, I believe if we all gave like that, I believe the economy would be back in the hands of, the church.
I mean, think about that. When 100, if 100% of believers who go to church tithed, it's 5% now. So if 95% came on board, said I'll give my 10%, the current church would increase their ability to evangelize, reach out, do governmental things, build housing for low income, for homeless, shelters for battered women, you name it. $139 billion.
And that's just the principal amount. That's not the increase.
That's not the increase God's going to bless it with.
Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah.
Those are some big numbers not in favor of the church.
Yeah. I mean, I just said a couple Sundays ago, when I mentioned the word tithe, I said, we're 20 to 30%, I think. And then, an hour ago, I re-looked at the current statistics, and because he told me someone said 4, and I'm like, man, you're so far off. You're so far off. And I looked up and it was like 5, and I'm like, oh my.
And that was literally as of 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it makes a little sense with 60% exiting the church.
Yeah.
Remember, I mean, the church doesn't save anybody, but it was established for a purpose.
Yeah.
like Greg said, to come together, to worship, to hear word together. But I loved how he said it, to hurt together,
Yeah.
to cry together.
Yeah.
That's huge, man.
It is huge because
hurt
what
together.
we were called to do together has caused separation.
Mhm.
Because we've taken hurt and used it as a bad thing, and we've distanced ourselves, separated ourselves, and left.
Mm.
Instead of getting closer together and saying, help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm having a feeling towards you. Help me. Well, absolutely. And if I have knowingly done something wrong, I need to own up to it anyway.
Right.
If I've unknowingly done something, let me know and let's work it out.
Yep.
And guess what? If we didn't work it out the first time, let's meet
Try
again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's too important not to be where God's called you to be. Again, I'll say it. It's important to be with your tribe. I mean, I heard that years ago. Find your tribe. Find the people you can identify with. And again, I feel like Remnant Church is a very special church that we do some very special things, and we are what we call it a acquired taste. We're not everybody's taste, but there is a remnant. I'll use that word. There's a remnant of people that have not found where they belong, and they're starting to come to our doors.
Yep.
And they're going to come. More are going to come.
Amen.
So,
Yeah. Guys, you know what? I think we're going to pick up here next week too, because there's some things we didn't get to about being the ecclesia that I really want to get into, like worship. And there was one thing that you said on the phone today about being, and man, it's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent in all of these areas. Through the actual consistency with God, that's whenever you see change, even like you said, in prayer and like your time with the Lord, in the giving, the tithing, and hurting together, attending church together. All of that stuff, man, the consistency in those things that God actually commands us, commands us to go do. That's where the breakthrough is. That's where the energy on that
and a lot
seed
of it,
to bust through.
a lot of it, guys. I'm not saying it's not easy. And listen, if you're listening or going to hear the retake on this, I was in a place one time where I was on staff at a church many years ago, and I found myself in such a dark place. A paid staff member, I did not want to go to church.
Yeah.
Paid staff member of a thriving youth program. But I found myself, it wasn't because I went out and was deep into pornography or doing drugs. No, I just found myself in a very isolated place. And I'm like, I just don't want to go. So I there's a part of me that understands where people get in this place, and the pandemic was, I think, seemed like a pandemic where if you can isolate enough people for enough time, they'll stay in that isolation because it becomes a new norm.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody had to finally jolt me to get me back and pull me out of this place of darkness. And we got a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I'll say it like this. And I'll tell you a little bit about the dark place. That people that said they loved me and supported me walked out on me.
Mm-hmm.
And all I tried to do was lead. That's all I tried to do, just lead. And I'm like, I told my wife, I said, I'm done.
Mm.
I'm hurting. This doesn't look like the church. But remember, I'm seeing it. Remember this as I'm saying this tonight. I'm seeing it through hurt. I'm seeing it through a place that I'm not letting God heal. So I don't want to see people to get the thought, well, the church is the problem. No, we are the problem, which we are the church, but it's not the entity of the ecclesia that's the problem. It's the enemy fighting against who we are, or who we've been called to be. And I had my pastor invite me to Israel. And I said, man, I'm broke as a joke. You know, you know what I make. And I'm like, I can't do it. He goes, it's paid for. And I'm trying to think of another excuse.
Yeah.
I'm just done. And have y'all heard this story?
I don't think I've heard this one.
Okay. I tell a lot of stories. So I go to Israel, and I tell my wife when I leave, I'm like, if I don't have the answer before I get back, then we're done. We'll pack and we'll leave and we'll go find something else to do. She's like, okay. I'm sure she went full blown intercession while I was gone. So, day one, we were there for 10 days. Day one, nothing. Day two, nothing. Day three, nothing. Day four, nothing. I mean, they've asked me, will you speak? I'm like, I just turn down every speaking engagement. It's like, I sit in the back, like I'm waiting for an angel to appear. I'm waiting for Jesus to remanifest in the Holy Land. And day 6, day 7, day 8, day 9, day 10, nothing. And we're headed to the airport. And the tour guide said, we have one last place we'll stop is at the Garden Tomb, and we'll have communion, and then we'll hit the airport, and then we fly back. And so we go into the Garden Tomb. We find it. They give us our section, bring us our elements out, and we take it. I'm thinking something's going to happen. It's a miracle with the wine and the bread, and man, nothing. And and the guy who's leading the group, he says, I'm going to pray us out, and then we'll make our way to the bus. He starts praying. And I say, God, okay, you haven't answered. So because you have not answered, your answer, because you did not answer, is you're through with me. And I'm like, and I just weep. And all of a sudden I feel 2 hands at my feet. And it's Dr. Paul Sorchi. He was on the group, him and his wife. I had got to know them. They're chiropractors down in Orlando. He looks at me, he says, and the Lord says, I see you in this very deep hole. He says, and it's so dark. He says, and you have tried to climb your way up. He says, and you would get to the top and you could almost to the light and you lose your grip and go back to the bottom. And you've tried it over and over and over and you're exhausted. He said, but the Lord said, if you'll climb one more time, he goes, this time the difference is, he goes, as you get to the top, he goes, and you start to slip. He says, I see a hand reaching over and grabbing you and pulling you out. He says, and as that hand pulls you out and you become topside, you have found out that it's just not one hand. That one hand is anchored by more people than you could ever see. That's the foundation, the stability of your healing.
That's good.
And I'm like, he says, so today you're coming into the light. And the darkness, the season of darkness is over. Oh, man. You talking about the midnight hour.
That's just like the Lord.
I said, because that's the church.
Yeah.
I mean, I was done. I don't know how to say how done I was done. But it was within 30 seconds of a closing prayer. There he was.
Like,
I am pulling
just
you out.
instantly.
Yeah. But the thing that got me was it wasn't just the hand of the person who was grabbing onto me. it was all those anchored behind them.
Yeah.
And I want us as a church, as Remnant Church, to become more of that. That it's just not one. We are anchored together.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're anchored together, there's nothing that we can't accomplish and nothing we can't pull anybody out of.
Right.
So
That's very good, my friend. That's very good. So, guys, next week is going to be part 2 of Ecclesia, called out to be the church, or called to be the church. And it was very good tonight. We actually really discussed some really in-depth things. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you joining us. If you're on the Remnant's YouTube page, just subscribe and turn the bell on. So next week, if you're really busy and we log on, it'll ding for you. So I'm pretty sure that's what the bell means. But guys, we do appreciate you being here. Share this out. If you go to our pages, you can see the flyer. Share it out. It's every Tuesday night at 7:00 Eastern time. So please feel free to jump on. And there's going to be a lot more in-depth war zone type of topics that will be shared as well. So I kind of want to go out on a song tonight, just one song.
do it.
And it's the Remnant song, because I really believe it's really fitting. So I'm just going to play this. I'm going to pull us off camera and leave up the flyer so you guys can screenshot it, share it out, all of that good stuff. But enjoy this song. It's called Remnant, and we will see you guys next week on here.
Welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. No rags, no different color flags. Yeah, welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. No guns, no knives, and the weapons pointed against me in the war zone. Welcome to the war zone. Are ever gonna prosper? I'ma serve the Father. Welcome to the war zone. Welcome to the